Welcome back to the Running Explained podcast. Hi, I'm Coach Elizabeth, and I'm here to break down the science of running in a way that actually makes sense. Whether you're training for your very first race, aiming for a new PR, or just trying to be a more balanced runner, this podcast is your go-to spot for all things running. At Running Explained, running is more than just about logging miles. It's about becoming the best version of you. That's why we talk about more than just improving your fitness, but how to support your physical, mental, and emotional health too, so you'll see improvements that go far beyond race times. And if you're looking for more support, I've got you covered. Whether you're interested in one-on-one coaching, following a structured training plan, or joining our supportive group coaching, I've got options to meet you where you are and help you level up. Ready to dive in? Let's go. Hey there, welcome back to the Running Explained podcast. I'm your host, Coach Elizabeth, and my guest this week is Dr. Kate Edwards. Kate is a physical therapist and running medicine expert. She is the founder of RunSource, and she is also a runner who has gone through a life-altering experience that has changed her relationship with running forever. For most runners, running becomes more than just a physical activity. It can become a part of who we are. It shapes our daily routines, it gives us purpose, it offers us a sense of identity. And so when something threatens that, whether it's an injury, burnout, or in Kate's case, a health condition, it's not just about the loss of a hobby. It can feel like losing a part of who we are, and that can require a profound shift in how we see ourselves. But here's the thing, Kate's story isn't just about running, and the experiences and challenges that she talks about today translate far beyond our hobby. Whether you're a runner or not, we all face moments when something important to us is taken away or we're forced to navigate an unexpected challenge. Maybe it's a serious injury or an illness or a career shift or a major personal event that forces us to make decisions that we don't want to make. So if you've ever felt like running or any part of your identity was taken from you or you're working through a tough transition, this conversation is for you. So get comfy and let's dive in. Kate, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. This is going to be fun.
This is going to be a ton of fun. So let's start at the very top, the origin story. Kate, tell us, how did you become a runner?
Sure. So I grew up in a small town, well, actually two, but halfway between Vermont and New York. And we didn't have cross-country team. We didn't have track and field. So one day I just decided to run. I don't know why. I did other sports, but I thought it would be really good. So I started by just running to the end of my dirt road and then home, and then running further down to our general store, which was like a few miles, and then back. And I just started doing that. And I did it because I needed to clear my head. It always, for me, from the very beginning, was something was going on and I needed to clear my head. So that's really how I started.
So let's skip from there all the way to today and tell us what you do. Who are you and what do you do today?
Ooh, it's a loaded question, but I'll do my best to make it short. So I'm a running medicine PT, so physical therapist, and I have a couple clinics that are for runners in the Atlanta area. I teach about running across the country and in the Southeast. I do running research. I write running books. I have a running podcast that, isn't really consistent, but that's okay. And then I, obviously treat patients. So I spend a lot of time treating difficult patients. So runners who don't get better other places, sometimes I'll consult and they'll fly and see me, or I'll just consult for them. And then I created a running app this year or last year. So everything has to do with running.
So it sounds like you're like the Dr. House of running related injuries.
That's really funny. I haven't thought of Dr. House in so long. Maybe.
Yeah, without the crippling Vicodin addiction.
That's right.
I love it. And we're going to dive more into that as we go along. But I want to ask you 3 quick questions to get, they don't have to be like one word answers. But get to know you a little bit more. And also because I'm curious. So Kate, tell me, if you could have an all expenses paid, guaranteed entry trip into any race in the entire world, what would you choose?
So I always wanted to do the Great Wall of China because I haven't been to Asia, and it the idea of just being in such an iconic place is really interesting to me. I've always done marathons all over. And it seems hard with all the stairs. So I always really loved a challenge. So that would be, I think, I'm actually surprised that that's my answer, but that's my answer. It seems like it'd be really incredible.
So is it a marathon? Is it an ultra? What's the race?
It's a marathon.
On the Great Wall of China.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
That's very cool.
Yeah.
I have not been to China, but my husband has. And he visited the Great Wall of China when he was on a business trip there. And he was about like to get up to it, they had to take like a gondola, like a tram, a chairlift thing to get up. And he was not expecting that. He kind of expected he was going to like walk right up and like walk onto the wall, but it's, not super accessible in a lot of those areas because it's a vantage point, right? You want to be able to, look off and see around you. So that would be super cool to do as a race.
I know a friend of mine from PT school actually did that. And I was always like, oh, I really want to do that race. She loved it. She thought it was great. So
put that on the bucket list.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. What is your run fuel du jour these days?
So, which you'll hear about shortly. I don't get to run long endurance races anymore. So I don't really think about fueling in the way that I tell my patients and the way that I used to do myself. I used to like GU, but that was, a while ago. And so most people don't use that anymore. So for me, I do. Well, that's good. That was what I loved. I loved the tri-berry GU and then the chocolate. And I would have that all the time, but I don't really need to do that anymore, the distances I'm running.
And last question, what is your all-time favorite Holy Grail running shoe that you've ever run in?
Oh, cool. I've tried so many shoes because I get them for free sometimes. And I kind of fall in love with all of them. I just love running shoes, especially like the new shoe smell. But I used to, I don't know. There's this new Puma, a fairly new Puma that they made for women, specifically that has a carbon plate, and the name is slipping me, right now. But that would be my favorite now. We could probably Google it and find it out.
Google it.
But I used to always run in Asics and lots of cushion.
So you're a maximal cushion shoe kind of gal.
Yeah. Probably because I would do marathons and longer.
Some people just like cushion. I mean, it makes it, I've talked about this with other people where we have these trends in running shoes that we don't even realize.
Yeah.
Remember when running shoes had like those weird air cushion pockets?
Oh my gosh,
like
yes.
the return.
Yes.
And you could see them because it was like clear and they would look so like futuristic.
It's true. And they've been through so many phases. And so, I actually give this talk about running shoes a lot and talk about the different phases and the timeline and kind of all the different components of it. And it's just so interesting to think about where those air pockets were. And now we have this foam that is helping us to go so much faster. And then we have this carbon and there's so many different pieces of running shoes that you really don't need to know, but we do.
Is it the Puma Deviate Nitro?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. They have a Puma Deviate Elite Nitro too.
It's not the Elite.
I know those were, wasn't Sarah Hall running in the, there were a couple of years ago, there were a range of very high profile runners who were all wearing this shoe and talking about it.
Yeah, I really like the way that it felt. Again, I think it's hard because I don't get to run like I used to. So I don't have as much, I used to only run in one shoe, even though I tell my, now we know you have to run in more than one shoe, but, I used to do that. And now because I don't run as much or can't, I just kind of go back and forth. I like Hoka's, I like Asics, I like Puma.
I know it's okay to, pile the basket high.
It's a bad pile.
Mine's just a closet. Do you need more running shoes? I do. It's for my job. It's for my job. I do need that pair. Just I've never tried them before, and I need to try them for my job.
Yes, me too. I love that. I'm like, oh yeah, definitely. I need these, and my husband would be like, okay,
sure you do. Okay, sure, honey. All right. So Kate, as you have said already a couple times in this on
Mhm.
this show. You can't run, you don't run the way that you used to run. So take us back. Tell us, tell us what you used to run. Tell us what that used to be like and how you got there.
Sure. So I've run 13 marathons, 3 Boston marathons, and I was doing like sprint triathlon, and I did so many half marathons. I used to do the Reach the Beach relay, which was a really fun race. It was overnight 24-hour race with a team. So I would do all sorts of different things. I did some 5Ks, but I actually was more nervous at 5Ks than I was at a marathon. I would get myself all worked up about going fast enough, you know. So I did that for a really long time. And then I was training for a half Ironman. And during training, it was actually directly on my son's first birthday. I went out for a regular 5-mile run, and I didn't feel that great, and I hadn't been feeling that great. But I went out, and I started to feel really bad. And I kept saying, like, what's wrong with you? Just because you had a baby doesn't mean you can't push yourself anymore. Like all this horrible self-talk about how, like if you need to prove to yourself that you're still a runner, you better sprint to the end. All the things you would tell other people not to do, but that's what I was doing to myself. And so I sprinted to the end of the run, and immediately I started to feel my sports bra tighten around my chest. I started to feel like I couldn't breathe. And when I looked down, my heart was out here, like it was beating so hard. And I knew something was wrong, and I felt like something was wrong. So I walked to the front steps of my house, and I put my head between my knees, and I said to myself, like, I really hope I don't die today. I was very convinced that I was going to, because I felt so bad. And luckily I didn't. But what we know is that I went into ventricular tachycardia. My heart rate went from 150 to 300. I thought my Garmin was broken. And I was lucky that I converted, like I self-converted back to a normal heart rhythm. And after that episode, I really was exhausted. I didn't really tell anybody at first because I was just confused. I think I was confused about, honestly. And then I went to work the next day, and I told my colleague, and she's like, what is wrong with you? Why are you here? Go to the doctor, which is obvious, really. But I went, and they didn't know what was wrong with me. And it took nearly 9 months to figure out what was wrong with me. And so during that time, it was really hard because, I was an endurance athlete. I was training for a half Ironman, and I had a marathon that I wanted to do. And they said, I don't know if you should really run that fast anymore. And then they would say, maybe don't run so much anymore. And then they would say, well, maybe you shouldn't bike. You definitely shouldn't get in the pool. And so like every week or every month they started, it was like pieces of me were being taken away, pieces of who I was, right? Because I was the kind of runner that I would get up in the morning based on my run. So whatever time it was because I wanted to run, or I was going to do it in the afternoon. What I ate was based on running. All my shoes and clothes were based on running. All my friends, we would talk about what races we were doing together or what races they were doing. It was just my whole life. And of course, work, which you already know. So all of that, like I had this very strong athletic identity as a runner. And over the 9 months from that day, it started to be stripped away from me. And then eventually I was diagnosed with something called ARVC. Actually, they call it ACM now, which is a ventricular tachycardia with cardiomyopathy. So it's cardiomyopathy. And essentially what that means is that there's an issue with my electrical system, which can cause VTAC, which is the dangerous kind of heart arrhythmias, the kind that a lot of people will have and then never wake up. And then the actual heart muscle itself can also break, like the little cells in between in the muscle break, and then the heart can become floppy. So it's a rare genetic heart disease that endurance exercise makes worse. So I can't do endurance exercise anymore. And that was a really huge loss. And over the years, for a long time, I didn't run at all. But I have a sports cardiologist who's amazing. And I have another cardiologist who I love, and we made a deal that for my mental health, I could run with somebody. I can't run alone, but with somebody a couple miles a week. So I'll probably run between 2 and 4 miles a week, but I have a running partner I meet every Monday just because that whole I don't know, it's almost like a religion, right? Like running with your running partner, that whole thing where you just go and talk about everything. And I love her very much. And every Monday we have these great conversations, and they might be really nerdy running conversations about what happened over the weekend that nobody else understands, or it might be about what's happening in our lives and we need support with. So that, to me, being able to do that now is incredible. I don't think that when this first happened, I would have valued 2 miles the way that I value it now. I didn't think that running less than 5 miles counted when I was in my 20s, but a lot of things are wrong in your 20s. but that's what I used to believe, right? So now, that 2 miles is a gift.
Wow. Oh my gosh, you have been through so much. I'm sure that what I'm hearing now is kind of that benefit of processing and having some, some emotional time to digest and maybe talk to somebody else about this. But I have so many questions. I want to go back to
Sure.
that first run where you experienced this and you said you felt bad on your run. And I know already I was thinking, yeah, if that happened to me too, I would probably just be like, there's something, what's wrong with me as an athlete? This is something I'm fatigued. I need to push through. It's my fault. When you say you felt bad before you stopped and then saw your heart just go a million miles a minute, what did that feel like? Right? Because runners, we're kind of used to feeling bad sometimes. Was this normal bad or bad?
Okay, so I didn't tell you that it had happened 4 or 5 times before.
Oh, there it is.
But I was trying to make the story short, right? So I actually passed out in 3 marathons and had been to several cardiologists and several doctors and had been tested several years before this point, and they never found anything. And so I had done all the follow-up or all the things I was supposed to do. So I had originally, the first time this ever happened, I was, I think it was I'm getting the years mixed up, but the Vermont City Marathon. I was in the Vermont City Marathon. It was 85 degrees. I was pushing myself as I was always doing. And I I started to get dizzy, and then I passed out on the course.
How far into the race were you?
I was at mile 22. And so I passed out on the course. No, it gets better. This is so bad. So then I woke up, and there was a guy on the bike, medical person with me. And he's like, okay, you need to get in the ambulance. I'm like, no, I'm fine. He's like, well, you kind of passed out on the course. I'm like, not happening. I am at mile 22 and I'm going to finish. And it took 30 minutes, but somehow I convinced this guy that I was running the race, and I did. And he rode his bike next to me the last 4.2 miles. And I finished it. So that's bad. I tell people, if you pass out on a race now, don't do it. And also, I work in medical tents. So what is wrong with me?
We're so good at giving advice, and we're so bad at taking it. Seriously.
It's so bad. So anyway, that was the first time. And
was there any prodrome? No, okay, I was going to ask you.
No.
So it just happened, and then you woke up and you were like, I'm fine.
thought I was dehydrated. So that was the first time that we didn't really do any, I didn't do any follow-up. Everyone was like, oh, you probably were dehydrated. And so, which, tracks for that happening in the heat and how hard I was pushing myself. And I had no warning. And I remember a couple training runs in the few years after that where I would get a little dizzy and I'd feel my heart racing. And I would slow down and drink water, and then I would be fine. So again, I thought it was fatigue or maybe just the heat because I was in Atlanta. But then I ran I'm going to miss one because I know there were 3 marathons, but I then ran the Philly Marathon, and I was on track to qualify for Boston for the first time ever. And I was so excited. And I could see the clock. I could see the clock. I was going to qualify. I'm running. And all of a sudden out. I had a loss of bowel or bladder, loss of bladder. And I don't remember anything. I woke up in the medical tent, but I have had scars all over my knees. I had stuff on my face, and I kind of remember like somebody picking me up under my armpits and saying, if you don't cross the finish line on your feet, it doesn't count. So there are pictures of me finishing that race with my hands up that I do not remember any of it. And I woke up hooked up to an EKG, and and people running around, and it was a long time, and I was really confused. And it was that race that they said, you need to go see a cardiologist. There's something wrong. And so I did all the testing, and they found nothing. I did stress testing. I did echocardiogram. I did everything. And they said, you know what? You're healthy. It's no big deal. You're probably dehydrated. So then the third marathon this happened in was when I moved to Chicago to do my orthopedic residency. I did the Chicago Marathon, and I was super stressed out. And every time I will mention I was stressed out when this happened, and stress does impact your heart. But I was running the race, and I was running with my husband, and he was too slow, so I left him, which is kind of like what I always would do.
Love you, bye.
And I was like, are you good? Because I'm good. He's like, bye. And so I left him, and then at mile 20, I started to feel lightheaded. So I started to walk to the side of the road, and again, down. And I woke up with my feet up in the air, and there was a police officer, there was a physician who was running in the race, and then there was EMT across the road. And again, I tried to convince them that I was going to finish the race. Thank God they didn't let me. This time they were like, no, lady, get in the ambulance. So then I got in the ambulance. They gave me I had water, they gave me an IV, everything. And I started to feel better. And then again, I said, so can I get out now and finish the race? And they're like, once you are in the ambulance, you are out of the race.
Yeah, we're done for the day.
We're done. Like, if you don't know, and I had left my husband, and he actually, when I sat up, he ran by, and I yelled to him, and I said, hey, Brian. And he's like, what are you doing? And he got in the ambulance with me. So, again, at the hospital, they said there was nothing wrong with me, and I was fine. So keep training. It was dehydration. And so this is what I thought for years. And I kept going to doctors. But I will say that the things now that I would key up and tell people in terms of like if you thought something was wrong, what were the symptoms? I would say lightheadedness, dizziness, catching as it got closer, like to the last time the first one I told you, I would feel anxiety. I would feel like my breath was, I couldn't get enough breath. Like I'd want to bend over and take a deep breath. And then my heart would start racing or skipping beats, and fatigue, a lot of fatigue. That kind of year after I had my son, before that major BTEC episode, I was fatigued a lot.
That's so frustrating that it kept happening, but the answers at the time made sense. You're a marathoner. It was hot. Weird stuff happens when you push your body that hard. Maybe you were just prone to dehydration, and I'm sure you were drinking all the fluids and taking all the electrolytes and all those things. But this is kind of the side of endurance sport that I don't think we talk about enough, but we do glorify a whole lot, is finishing and persevering despite incredible hardship, passing out and then getting up, and continuing across the finish line. And we see it in triathlon, we see it in marathons, we see it, and we're like, wow, that's so inspiring. That person's so dedicated. That is what perseverance looks like. And I don't think we're recognizing that in a lot of those situations, we could be looking at a serious medical emergency.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was. And something that my cardiologist told me, and I like everyone to know, is that if you're passing out during exercise, it's probably cardiac. So that is if you are passing out, or you're having you're getting this chest pain during exercise, or you're having loss of breath, or whatever it is, you need to get it checked out. And also there's family history too. So I didn't really know if I had family history, but family history is one of the biggest predictors of having a cardiac issue. So I thought that I was immune because I was an endurance athlete. And that's, I think, what a lot of us think. But I learned a lot through this process, and I learned a lot from my cardiologist. And he said, actually, endurance athletes, a lot of us get into it because we're trying to get out of addiction. That wasn't me, but like that does happen. People who are coming out of addiction or want to lose weight or used to smoke. So they may have a lot of underlying issues that you don't think about, even though they're endurance athletes. And so that could set them up for something. And then the other thing is the stress that we put on ourselves. And that actually can be a trigger as well to other underlying health. But yeah, you're right. Like it could be a major medical issue. Passing out in running is probably a major medical issue.
Did you go through a process where you tried to figure out if you'd caused this if you'd done this to yourself?
Oh, girl. I blamed myself for this for a really long time. I actually had a very hard time with anxiety and depression following this diagnosis because it was my whole world. Like I felt like my entire world was crashing down around me. And then I thought, like, what could I have done different? Right. So like, okay, maybe if I didn't push myself so hard, why did I have to go out to the track at 5:30 in the morning and run with the boys all the time? Why did I do that? Or why did I think hill repeats were the best thing in the entire world? Or couldn't you have taken a break and maybe not done 13 marathons and maybe just been happy with a 10K? So I constantly said things like that to myself. Again, I've learned not to speak to myself that way. And I've learned that it's not my fault. It's genetic. And the trigger is exercise, endurance exercise. And the harder, that you train. So yes, in a way, maybe I caused it, but I also could have had it and not run a marathon.
Yeah. And that's so hard. And I want to point this out because I think that many of us, especially women, we're so quick to blame ourselves. But you said after the run, you were a year postpartum and you thought, this is me, like just needing to get back into it. I need to get, tougher. I need to, do this. This is, me being weak. And then what could I have done to do? Did I cause this? Did I contribute to it? And it's so hard because admitting that we don't have control over it feels really scary, right? Like if I couldn't have done anything to impact or prevent or influence this, like that is scary.
So scary to think about the lack of control. What I've learned again, so since then, is that we actually never have control. It's just we believe that we have control. And but for people like us, and people like me, control feels important. And, whether it's control over your schedule or your body or whatever it is, a sense of control feels really good. And then that loss of control can be very unnerving and can just take the ground out from under you.
So you said this is genetic. So does one of your parents have this, or do you have a documented family history?
No. So, one of my parents has the gene. I don't know which one. So
you can do genetic testing for it.
Yeah. So I was the first for it to show up in my family, which probably has to do with my endurance history. However, my son has the gene. And that was probably one of the most devastating things that happened throughout this whole thing. Like I could deal with losing running, kind of deal with it. I could deal with, having to go through all this testing. But then the idea that my son may have to go through all this it was a really hard thing for me. And then it's actually not been as hard as I thought it would because he's super cool. He's 10 and we've talked about it since he was a baby because we tested him when he was a year. And so he knows about it and we kind of steered him away from sports because that was the suggestion. I don't feel like he's going to have the same loss of something he really loves. That's really what I was trying to protect him from, but but he's very active. And we don't, that's a really important thing because all of us in our house are really active.
And I'm sure everybody knows the kind of signs and symptoms and what to look out for. And because that's the thing, the education piece, right? Where we think, well, I'm lightheaded because I've been running 22 miles in 85-degree heat, and rather than saying, well, it could be something else.
Right. And most of the time it's not. I also don't want to scare people.
Right.
I think it's important for people to not be scared about that story, but most of the time it's not, but it could be. So that's why it's always like if you ever pass out in a race to see a cardiologist.
I'm so interested by this, going back to that where we just kind of internalize it and blame ourselves and then push it under a rug until it happens again, if it happens again. That, when we, and I mean we, runners, endurance athletes, when we encounter situations like that, the thing that you were trying to do and you couldn't do it and you blame yourself for it, that we are never then curious necessarily about why. We just like never want it to happen again. So we just kind of pretend it didn't happen.
Oh my God.
Rather than saying like, oh, that was super weird. Okay. This sucks. Maybe it's not 100% my fault. Could there have been any other cause for this? Like, we don't like that. We just feel like, I just never want this to happen. I'm not going to think about it.
Yeah, I think it's fear, right? So it's fear of the unknown and it's fear of not being able to do what we want to do. So when I got cleared from the cardiologist, I was like, whew, I'm fine. I never wanted to dive into it. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to do it because that meant I might not be able to do what I love. And I think that that's what it comes down to is, we're afraid to lose the things that we love.
When you were at that point after the third marathon where this happened, where the cardiologist started saying, hey, we need to slow down on some of these things. And you said it was like pieces of your identity were being taken away, right? You can't run, but now you can't bike, now you can't swim, now you can't do this. Like, did that happen in the face of new information, new evidence? Or were they just kind of saying, we don't know enough to recommend that this could be safe. We'd better safe than sorry and have you not do it until we figure out what's going on?
It was the latter of the two. So they didn't know and they kept doing tests and I would pass certain tests and then they would repeat them because they couldn't figure it out. Like it just didn't. So my case was mild enough that it didn't, it wouldn't come to the forefront. You know what I mean? And because I passed some of the tests that they would normally consider a gold standard for this diagnosis. Yeah, it was very strange. They were afraid that something would happen. Like I remember in my, in one of my cardiologist's office when I first met him, he was like, because they didn't know what was wrong, they said, could you make it come on? And I said, oh yeah, I can make it come on. Because I knew what it felt like so for it to come on. And I got on the treadmill and he wanted to do a stress test. I'm like, sure, we could do a stress test. So we're doing a stress test and nothing's happening. And that's when he says, can you make it come on?
Tell us what a stress test involves.
Oh yeah. So you get on the treadmill and they hook you up to like this machine that looks at the rhythm of your heart. And the stress test, it can be, you start going slowly and then they increase the elevation of the treadmill. And it's usually you start jogging. And so for most people, that'll be a stress test. But for an endurance athlete, that's super easy, right? And so what was happening is I would pass the stress test because they never took me to my limit. So this physician, this cardiologist, he was like, make it come on. I said, cool. So I pumped up the speed really fast and I was running like under 7 minute mile at a thing. And he was like, oh my God, shut the treadmill off, shut the treadmill off, shut the treadmill off. I was in VTAC and didn't know it. Like my heart was in that dangerous rhythm and had no idea. I was like, it hasn't come on yet. He's like, it is on. And so he shut it off. He freaked out. Like everybody surrounded me. And then I was like, what's wrong?
Wow.
So that was a really interesting eye-opening thing for me because I didn't even know I was in VTAC, which tells me that makes sense why people sometimes, why like a couple of the races, I just passed out and didn't know. And then other people, if they have this disease, sometimes they just die and never wake up. And I can see how that would happen because you don't necessarily know.
So the ventricular tachycardia, is it an atypical rhythm, an abnormal rhythm? Is it just like super fast? Like what? Because you said you didn't know, you didn't feel it, right? You hadn't kind of gotten to the point where you felt it, but like what was the cardiologist seeing where he was like, oh my God, it was going, yeah.
Like
all the spikes.
Like everything you see on all those episodes of the TV, like in the hospital or the ER. That's what it was. Yeah, we can laugh now, but
Yeah, now I know, but
now
I'm sure
it's
it was
funny,
terrifying at the time.
for him, I wasn't terrified. He still talks about it. That was 9 years ago. And he's like, remember that day on the treadmill?
You're like, you do, apparently.
Yeah. Oops.
So that was 9 months, 9 months from passing out to the stress test where they're like, oh, this is what it is.
No, that stress test, they still didn't know what it was. They just knew that it was VTAC.
Okay.
So I even went and had a cardiac ablation because they thought it was a non-specific VTAC or ventricular tachycardia. So they thought I was going to be able to continue running. So that was really good news in the beginning, which ended up being wrong. So I went to the hospital. I had this this ablation, and I felt so much better after. I thought I was better.
So an ablation, is that where they go and they like put a balloon in and kind of clear some stuff out?
No, it's burnt, like burning, like they burn out like a, and so it just changes the path of the electrical system. And cool. So I felt great. And I felt really good, actually. That was like a really life-changing thing. I didn't know I was so tired. Like, so I told you, I was a year postpartum when all that happened. Well, when I was pregnant, I was falling asleep at 3 p.m. I thought that was normal, but now we know it was my heart. I was so tired all the time, like going to bed at 7 o'clock after I had Andy all the time. So yeah.
Did any of this show up in your, your blood oxygen level? Like, was it, there was just no sign other than fatigue and some weird things that could be attributed to just being an endurance athlete and push yourself really hard?
Yes.
Unless you happen to have also been up to an EKG when it was happening.
Correct. Shocking. I know. It's scary.
So when did the day come? How do we figure out, hey, this is it?
Yeah, it was, they decided to do genetic testing. After they did all the tests, they couldn't figure it out. They decided to repeat some of the tests. And then they had different people read the tests, and they found something that might be an issue in my MRI, cardiac MRI. And so then they said, we really need to send this for genetic testing. They sent it for genetic testing, and it came back positive for this, for ACM.
And so you have a pacemaker now?
Yeah, I do. I actually just got it replaced in June. So I had it for like 8 years. It lasted for 8 years. It's under my armpit though. It's a weird one. Like, it's like under my armpit. So like you can't put your wallet under your arm anymore. It kind of feels weird, but yeah, it's not like in a normal place. And so it's not a pacemaker, it's just a defibrillator. So if my heart goes into VTAC, it'll shock me out.
And are there certain, I assume, restrictions on, hey, don't let your heart get, heart rate too elevated?
So I don't know what my cardiologist would say. I hope he doesn't listen to this. No, I'm just kidding. I just thought, but I don't really know exactly what those restrictions are. Like, we don't have a heart rate restriction. What are restrictions? The restrictions that I have are no endurance exercise and keep it easy. So I lift weights 3 times a week, 2 to 3. Some days I can't, or some weeks I can't do 3. I can do yoga. I can do Pilates. I don't really do Pilates that much. I get distracted, but, and then I walk every day, and then I do my 2 miles, once or twice a week. But that's a lot for people with what I have. There's this, conference at Johns Hopkins where they study this particular disease, and and it's for patients, which is really cool because they educate you on it and they tell you the new research. I used to go, and it's a room full of former athletes who are a lot of people are really sad and having a really hard time. But you're at least meeting other people and learning about what's going on at those conferences. And I forgot why I was telling you about that.
So that's really interesting. I was going to ask you kind of about how common this is, and obviously this can be fatal. You say this a bunch of people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, athletes who can't do their sport anymore. That's devastating.
Yeah, I stopped going because for me, it was too emotionally hard to go to the conference, because a lot of times it's new people who are trying to work through things. It helped me so much when I first was diagnosed, but now it's a lot, like it's a big emotional, and I actually feel good. Like I feel fine. I forget that I have anything. The only reason I remember is because I have this defibrillator, and I sometimes I go through the airport thing by accident, and it beeps, and I'm like, oh crap, I have this defibrillator, so I feel good. And if because I'm used to not running marathons anymore.
So I want to talk about that, right? The identity piece. I'm sure even now it's probably still painful. Even being in the space, right? Being able to continue your work in the running space and do that. Talk to me about that initial period when they said this, you're done. Can't do this. No more running. Like how devastating was that?
I mean, I quit my job, and I couldn't be in that environment anymore. So I was still a PT. I'm still PT now, but I was a PT in a pretty stressful practice. It was kind of, eat what you kill. But I had like a 4 to 6 month waiting list because I treated runners. And so I was seeing runners all the time, every single day. And I was really, really busy, but also exhausted. And so I said, I can't really do this like this anymore. I need to take care of my mental health. And so I quit my job, and I rented a room in somebody else's practice. And I, quote, opened my practice, which was only me in a room. And that was 10 years ago, thinking that nobody would find me because I had a non-compete and didn't tell anybody where I was going to be. I didn't have a front desk person, nothing. And so I opened that day, and then I had a 6-month waiting list that day. And I didn't know what to do. So my friend was a neuroscientist, and she had sabbatical. So she was my front desk person. And we figured it out. But I made it, even though that happened that quickly. I only worked 3 days a week instead of the 5 days a week. And I changed my hours so that I had time to like rest and like restore. And I worked with a psychologist for a long time, like a lot of talking, a lot of figuring things out. I started to meditate, which I hated because I didn't want to sit still, and my brain's like always like this. But I do it every day now, and it's made a huge difference in my life. I started to do yoga. My husband actually joked because he said, I didn't know that you could do competitive yoga. and I said, what? So I would go there was a point in my life where I was going every single day more than once because I just needed to move my body. And as a runner, like I couldn't find the high. Like I was looking for a high, like that running high, and I couldn't find it. I still can't find it again. And, but I was so addicted to it that I was doing everything within my means. I was working out, and going to yoga, and we had this there was some kind of like challenge at the yoga studio, like do yoga for 30 days in a row. And I was like, I'm going to win that. So, I mean, it was a really interesting time. My husband was incredible. My son was really young, so that was also challenging. And I was apparently opening a practice, which I didn't mean to do. But I did take a lot of downtime. And if I couldn't do something, I wouldn't. From like a mental standpoint and a physical standpoint. And that was really humbling because I was always someone that did everything the hardest and the best all the time. And then I was the person that had to say no, and I can't, and I need to rest. And those are really hard things.
I think a lot of people struggle with that, but we often aren't in a position where we're forced into it, right? It's like the hard lesson, right? You either come to terms with it or you don't, right?
Yeah.
When you say now being able to run a couple miles at a time with someone, is that something that did you do a lot of solo running before? Is this something where you really wish you could just go for a couple miles by yourself sometime? How does that feel?
Yeah, so I did run with other people and I ran alone. I love to run alone. Again, I started running because of the mental health piece for me. It was where I figured everything out, like all my business ideas, all my issues, like, do I want to date this person? Oh my God, I'm going to get married. Like all the things, right? Like I figured everything out on my runs. In fact, I get lost now all the time because I don't run there, right? So I used to not get lost as much because I would run 20 miles around wherever it was, or whenever I would go to a new city, I would run it first. And then I would go wander out so I knew where I was. But so it was, I miss running alone and solving the problems. But I am so grateful to have my running partner now because I did that social connection and community you get with running. I really missed that a lot when I wasn't running at all.
Did you ever think about like walking away from
Mm-hmm.
running related stuff entirely, just it being too painful at the beginning?
I don't think I ever did, which is really interesting. Um, I don't think it was ever an option for me. I don't remember a time where I thought I'm not doing this anymore. Instead, I doubled down.
In true runner fashion. We'll
You
just do
know,
it harder.
I can't do this. I'm going to do it harder. That's right.
Obviously, this question is like, duh. Like your relationship to running has changed drastically. And I think with age, a lot of us develop a maturing, part of our relationship with running, maturing as a runner. What have you noticed about your relationship with running that has maybe been because of where you are now, that you may not have been able to achieve if this hadn't happened? Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah. So I don't need it, but I love it. I needed it before. I needed it. It was my crutch. I used it to run away from things, to avoid what I didn't want to address, whether that was things I was dealing with from a mental health standpoint, a relationship standpoint, or whatever. I used running for everything. It was like the only thing I had as a coping mechanism. And I actually notice this in my patients sometimes. And I think I've become a much better physical therapist and healthcare provider because of this experience, because I know loss and I know that, even when you sprain your ankle or have like, anterior knee pain or patellofemoral pain, whatever you want to call it, and you can't run for a little bit, I get that. You know what I mean? Like I really, truly know what that feels like. And I think because I don't need it anymore, I can respect it a little bit more. And I don't, it's not a crutch for me.
Do you often see runners who appear to be using running in that coping mechanism way?
I would say, I don't want to give a percentage, but it's incredibly high. It's, and we see all runners in this practice. And again, I doubled down. So all my friends are still runners and all the things, right? So I would say that a majority of people that I know or cross paths with use running as a stress relief, as a mechanism, as to run away from things, or to be the achiever. Like they use it as like a way to feel better about themselves or feel good about themselves. A lot of us have this not enough feeling. I think that running can fuel that and can fill in that space of, if you're not enough here, well, I'm enough here in this race. If I run fast enough, I'm enough. And that's not true, but those are the stories that we're telling ourselves. And I hear that and see that a lot in athletes. And that's why one of the things that I think it's really important as an athlete is to make sure that you have something outside of your sport that you love. Just have one or two other things, so that if you lose it for a day, a week, a month, or a lifetime, you at least have something else that you can go to. Might not be the same. I mean, I'm always going to miss running, but at least it'll give you something so you don't go down to that deep, dark depression, anxiety place where I see a lot of people ending up when they can't do what they love.
Because I've definitely thought this is that, well, yeah, but that's not really me. And even if it were, this is so rare. That would never happen to me. I'm healthy, I'm young, although getting older every day, right? I'm not clumsy, I have
Yeah.
resources, I am unlikely to experience something that would result in a loss of running. But that's the whole point, right? Is that anything can happen.
Anything. And that was me. I was you, Elizabeth. Like, I thought I was going to be running, marathons until I was 100. I was convinced, like, I knew it was in my genes. Like, it was there. I was doing it. I was doing everything right. Right. I was eating right. I was strength training. I was like doing all the things. I was following all the rules. And even though I followed all the rules, it still happened. And it can happen to anybody. Luckily, it doesn't happen to a lot of people or most people, but it can. I mean, think of it from this perspective. A lot of us, running changes with us throughout our whole life, right? So wherever we are in our life, it looks different. Like, maybe you ran in high school, or maybe you ran in college or professionally or not. Maybe you didn't run after you had a baby, or maybe started after you had a baby. Maybe you're somebody who's running 2 miles now for fitness, even though you used to do marathons. It changes. And so our relationship changes with it. And I do think that as we get older, hopefully we can respect that relationship with it a little bit more and understand what it is. It's not everything. I'm sorry. I hate to say that out loud. People are going to maybe give me hate mail, but like, it is not everything. It can be a lot. It can be like your community, your job, like for me, but it's not everything.
I think we're allowed to criticize this, because if we can't, then it's a cult, and I don't want to be in a cult.
That's right.
Right?
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we're allowed to
Yeah.
say, you know what,
Yeah.
this isn't like, infallible. I love that you mentioned the runners who experience a loss of running, whether short term, long term, that, we're always looking for, well, if I can't run, we do kind of a bargain, right? A bargaining. Well, if I can't run, what else can I do that's basically exactly like running? And then as those things get caught, wait, for injured runners, well, I can't run, but I can elliptical, I can bike, I can maybe do an Ultra G, I can be in the pool. Like, cool, I'll get, my fix.
Yeah.
I won't lose any fitness while I'm rehabbing my
Mm-hmm.
injury. But as you slowly kind of take those off the list, what you said before about there's really nothing that replaces running, but we always are looking for that thing.
Yeah. So something that I would like to put out there in the world, and it's a little bit radical, but we have to ask ourselves, why are we looking for that thing that replaces running all the time? Why do we, like, what is it behind? I ask this question too, because like when people have overuse injuries or getting injured, like, why do they keep doing the same thing over and over? What is it for you that's creating that need to do that? I think that that's the bigger question we have to answer. And again, I love running. There's nothing, like, I think running is
We're
great.
very pro running here.
Yeah, obviously, right? You know what I mean? Like, I think it's great. I think it's so healthy in so many ways, but I think it can go just like everything else. Like, we can use it in unhealthy ways.
And it's hard too, because we can look at all the things that, and I know this has happened, been true for me, where it's running can be, and these tools that we think of, right? Perseverance,
Yeah.
grit, fortitude, setting big goals, believing in ourselves, pushing through when things get challenging, learning about ourselves. And like, these are all the gifts that running can give us. And then, but like you said, we never kind of, think, how are we using this tool? Is that thing that's teaching you grit and perseverance and resilience driving you to run on a stress fracture? Or,
Yeah,
because it's kind of the
exactly.
same coin, two sides.
That's right. So when is it still grit and perseverance? And when is it self-harm? Or when is it avoidance? Or when is it, or maybe it's just unknown, like you don't realize you're doing it, because there's that piece too. But then, even if we're using stress fracture as an example, like there's stress fracture often occurs because of low energy availability or red. So is it because we're not eating enough on purpose, or we don't have the education for it? So there's a lot of like nuances about it that you don't really, I think about all the time because of my experience and also my job. But yeah, it's interesting.
Would imagine that this experience has given you a ton of perspective about how running fits into our lives. When you are working with a runner, let's say they come in and they're training for something that's very important to them, and you are having a conversation with them and saying, hey, look, based on what I'm seeing, we really need to take some time off. That thing is not going to happen. And they're devastated, right? And it becomes this fear, and I've 100% experienced this myself. We become so fixated on this goal 2, 3, 4 months from now that when we are told, hey, might need to pivot, it's devastating. But
Yeah.
I think, when we, in retrospect, in hindsight, if we zoom out and get a perspective, it's like, well, what's the big deal? But it's so personal and it's so emotional in the moment.
Yes. It's so personal and so emotional. And it doesn't matter what somebody else says to you. You have to feel all those things, right? You have to go through it. So for me, like I often sit with people through that, right? And we talk about it and we talk about maybe what's behind it. Or we might say, okay, like this is your goal now. It doesn't mean you can't run this race, but maybe not this year, or maybe we run a different race. And we kind of work through like the strategy behind it too. It's funny because PT, everybody thinks PT is like massage and exercise and maybe a couple like needles and things like that. That is not what PT is like in this clinic. And maybe it's just because of like my experience, but like we're like strategizing about races and we're like thinking about, okay, well, what can we do? And just, and then letting people grieve. Like, it is not a small thing to train for 4 months for an event and then be told you can't do it because you have a stress fracture. You can grieve that. That's okay. And you should. And then you should put everything aside. You should, like breathe into it, feel all the things, and then set a new goal.
Going through the experience, like, being pregnant and going through the evolution of your relationship with running during pregnancy and postpartum, like obviously as you were kind of going through all of this as well, but pregnancy and being postpartum as a runner also have its own, it's a huge part of being a runner in that journey where there's just so much going on and your body's changing and your life's changing and your goals are changing. Do you feel like having had that experience helped at all, or was it worse because you had taken a break and then we're coming back and we're like more excited about it?
Well, so I wrote a book about return to running postpartum after I returned to running postpartum because I was so mad at the system and about how, and nobody knew what to tell me and all the things. And now there's a lot more resources out there about it. Absolutely. But, like 10 years ago, there was nothing. And so I made something. I gathered all the research. I worked with a pelvic health therapist and we wrote a book. And so I went through that experience and I was like, felt like I was in such a good place. Like I was coming back from having this baby and I was doing a half Ironman and then I wasn't.
So I really hate asking this question, but I do want to know.
Sure.
Because a lot of what I want to say, I'm not a physical therapist, but being in this space and working with runners and in a coaching environment or whatever it is that a lot of what we do is we look at the totality of the thing and we look for patterns, right? And sometimes when we are looking, we're here today, can we trace back and say, how did we get here? Were there any points previously where maybe we could have caught this earlier, or hey, this was literally like, this is the first time we could have put all the puzzle pieces together? Was there anything? So if anybody else obviously thinking like, hey, if you pass out when you're running, go to the cardiologist. But in retrospect, in hindsight, was there any point at which you think to yourself, yeah, this should have been the moment where we figured it out instead of when you actually did? Or was it just, it had to happen the way that it did?
I think it had to happen the way that it did. It's really interesting. I can't remember exactly when I think this was before I went into VTAC, like the last time I really, the one where I stopped at my steps. But I think about a month before, it was about a month or two before that, I ran a half marathon and I felt funny. And I told myself, I think this is your last race. And I don't know if I've said that out loud. I may have said that out loud, but I don't think I have. And I purposely slowed down in that race and paid special attention to everything. I remember that race, every bit of it, because I slowed down and paid such good attention to it because I didn't feel good. And I thought, I don't know if I'm going to get to do this again. And I never got to do it again. And so I'm so glad that that happened. But yeah, I don't know. And I don't know that there was any point or any way that this could have gone differently for me because I did all the right things. I went to all the right people and nobody knew. And I had all the right tests until I didn't.
That's so fascinating that a part of you, something in you knew. Like you didn't know what was wrong or why, but you knew that something was wrong enough that that race, this was going to be something different.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It was the Publix half marathon, which, now
I love that race.
I know. Well, and my company is we treat all the elites that come into town for that race. So we are in the, the elite area, treating all the elites the whole time for that weekend. So I wouldn't even run it now because I would be treating. But yeah, that was before then. And I loved that race and it was a beautiful, thing. And I'm glad I got to do it and think about it that way.
This is that when I tell people like, hey, when you have that gut check, right? Ask yourself a question and the first thing that pops into your head, that's the answer. That we don't always like the answer, but our things bubble up sometimes that are truth.
Yeah. I'm all about the gut check. If you're telling I tell my patients that, I tell my family that, I do that all the time. If something comes up for me, I really stop and listen and see if that's reality or something I need to pay attention to because it's happened so many times in my life at this point.
So these days, active, running a little bit every week. You talked about stress being such a kind of a component to this. Are you very mindful of the life stress that you have? Is that something that is very important to you?
Yeah. I mean, we'll see what people around me say, but it is definitely a piece to I don't usually start my day until I get up, but I don't usually start my work day until about 10 a.m. unless something comes up. Like I had to cover for one of my therapists today. So I started earlier, but usually 10 o'clock and I get up and I walk and I meditate and I take some time to myself. And I walk my son to the bus and I do those things that kind of ground me. And I might read a little bit. And then around 10 o'clock, I start my day. I answer emails. I set up meetings. I'll see patients or I'll start writing, whatever it is I need to do. So I've structured my life very differently now. The other thing is so it's twofold, right? Like when you own businesses, you can work yourself to burn out very quickly. And I'm not saying that I haven't done that because I have. And also you have the freedom to take a rest and to take a break when you need to. And for me, having that freedom to choose myself when I really need to is very important. And I do that a lot more now than I used to. And I'm still not as good at it as I would like to be, but I'm much better than I used to be. And that's the only thing we can ask is to get better over time.
I love that you've created morning rituals because running is very ritualistic. You even said that, right? The kind of the Monday ritual. And I think that's oftentimes what we really feel the loss of this thing. I remind people, our brains are lazy and our bodies, we love routine. Like even if you don't realize it, like we love patterns, we love routine, you take some of that away. And it's not just the loss of the thing. It's like, yeah, but my whole day is messed up now.
Yeah.
So if somebody's listening to this and is in a period of not running for whatever reason, that component of creating that time for yourself in other ways is really important.
Yeah, it's really important. And sometimes it's on Fridays. See, there is a pattern to my life. I'm very scheduled and it's because I thrive this way. But on Friday mornings, I have coffee with my two best friends every Friday morning after bus. And that would have been a run in the past. But now I can't run, but we have our morning coffee and we talk about all the things.
So looking ahead, because
Yeah.
that's the most important part. No more looking back, looking ahead. You're clearly very well planted in the running community, professionally, personally still. Being able to see a bit of the shifts in our community change, what are you most excited about that is happening in running these days?
I love the acknowledgement of the difference between the male and female runner. And I've read a lot of the research. I speak about, female athletes all the time. And it's a really cool time to be looking at what research is coming out and what research you can be involved in, and what we can do to help the younger generations run in a healthy way and fall in love with it in a healthy way, and then do it in a way that respects their body and works with their body. So I think it's so cool that we now talk about the menstrual cycle and how that impacts training and performance. And I think it's really cool that we're talking about menopause and what happens in menopause to the body, and about the protein and the increased strength training that's necessary. And it's funny, but 10 years ago, it was like, wow, people are talking about pregnant people running. But now that's like a normal thing to talk about. So I find what's happening with women's health and female runners and female athletes to be really incredible. And it's some of my favorite work to do.
It does feel like we're entering a new era of understanding, which is very cool.
It's so cool.
Speaking of that more female-specific physiology, is there anything else that you have learned or come across or think is good for women to know specifically about their heart health?
I don't know, because we don't talk about it very much. But the one thing I will say is, since we are talking about like cycles these days and hormones, there is a hormonal aspect to what's going on in your heart, right? So for me, and I bet other women would feel this, and I've talked about this with my cardiologist, like we don't do my yearly Holter if I'm about to have my period, because the hormonal changes that are occurring actually impact my my heart rhythm. And so I guess the answer was yes. Actually, Elizabeth, I do have something to say. But
that's very cool.
Yeah, no, it's true. And so we don't do. So we'll wait until I'm not in that part of my cycle to track my heart, because it's different. And I feel more symptoms if I'm going to be symptomatic, which is very rarely. It's always in that time.
And what does that feel like?
It feels like my heart might be racing a little bit more. Or I'll feel little palpitations. It's like a boop, like it's almost like, yeah, that's it. I like startled. I'm like, what was that? Oh, it's fine. So I think like if you're feeling palpitate, like if it feels like you're kind of like, I wonder what that was. Or that, when I described my sports bra, feeling really, really tight while I was running, and like when I was trying to take a breath, I mean, I think that was something to think about, because later I realized it was the feeling of my heart pushing out to it, and the way that the band around men don't have that. They don't wear that. So that band and that like expansion from my heart beating so fast, that was a cue for me. Yeah.
Did anybody ever suggest to you that it was a panic attack instead of a cardiac issue?
Yeah, like you're crazy.
Yeah, like, are you sure you're just not super anxious? Some sort of complicated woman? I don't know.
Oh my God. Yes, of course people thought maybe I was anxious. Of course. I mean, people think I'm anxious now. I mean, I'm not, but yeah, I mean, that's a real thing. And cardiac issues come with anxiety. So you can have anxiety because you have a cardiac issue, a metabolic issue, an injury, like a knee injury. So anxiety often comes with something else too. Or, it comes because we can't control something. So yeah, people have, in the beginning, were like, are you sure it's not anxiety? And I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Like, trust me, I know anxiety, and this is not anxiety.
Yeah, I've been there. I've been around that block. It's not this.
Wow, Kate, what an adventure you
Yeah.
have been on. Probably not the one you would have chosen, but we don't always get to choose our own adventures.
No, we don't. But I wouldn't be who I am if I hadn't done this.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not really the universe gives you but the things that happen to us in our lives shape who we are, and we can do with that what we will.
That's right. Exactly.
So these days, deeply involved with running as you are still to this day working with runners, I know that you and I got connected because you have an app that is going to
Hmm.
help runners, and I'm very excited about it. So can you please
Yeah.
tell us more about that?
Yeah, thank you. Like I said, I would probably forgot to say something. It's called Run Source. It's on Apple and Google Store. And what I did was so this is the fun part, right? So I work with a multidisciplinary team for the Atlanta Track Club Elite, and I was working with them, and they didn't, in the beginning, I realized like, oh my gosh, elite athletes don't have all the resources they need. And then I was like, oh my God, neither do any of my patients all in one place. And I started to think about that and all the people I know through running medicine and performance. And then people would come into my clinic and they would say, or I would say, you probably need to see a nutritionist, maybe maybe a sports psychologist. And then it got to be so expensive and unreasonable. And so I was looking at this problem like, okay, there's all this information I wish my athletes knew, or these are the things that they really need help with, but it's expensive. There are plenty of people that know about running. There really aren't as many people as you think that really understand running at such a depth when it comes to healthcare. And I thought like, okay, well, how can we solve this? So I started by asking all my friends in running medicine and performance. And then my network, as it grows, got bigger. And I think we're about 50 experts that all came together on the app to share their knowledge. So I think of it as like a knowledge hub for runners. Anything you want to know, it's there. And it's like it walks with you. So like if you have a coach, it's not replacing your coach. It's giving you information about common running injuries or how to stay injury free, even though we don't think we're going to ever get an injury. Or how to recover, or questions about shoes. If you have a healthcare provider that you're seeing for an Achilles tendinopathy, well, this has an Achilles tendinopathy program with strength training, mobility, but it also has information from the nutritionist, the sports psychologist, the yoga instructor that you're not going to get at your PT office. So I use this, I give this to my patients to use in conjunction with our care. And that's kind of what our experts are kind of doing as well. And it's really exciting because it's finally something where all these people who are truly experts in their field decided to get together to help us runners.
I'm so excited about this because you're absolutely right. I think anybody who kind of walks through the door running and thinks they're just going to run a couple times a week and run that half marathon and it won't consume their life and open up all these other doors of exploration, right? Because as soon as it's like pulling a thread, right? And I like to say in a good way, this is a good way,
Yes.
that running helps teach us about ourselves and our lives in a way that may not have happened because it exposes where the deficits are, right? It exposes your relationship to other things like sleep and yourself and the people around you and food and so all of this, but like you said, once you start having, well, I need to see this practitioner and this practitioner, that really adds up. And it's very rarely in network or covered by your insurance if you're in America. And it's tough too, because especially, and this is, I'm sure why you did this when you were looking at a runner and say, I really want to help you, but I'm really only, one part of this, like one wedge in the Trivial Pursuit piece, but you need all the wedges. So how can we get you the rest of the wedges?
That's exactly it is, I know all this good information. I know all these people who know this good information, but do they live near you? Can you even get into them? Are they in network? The answer is most likely no to all of those questions. And so, that's why I put it together. And the cool thing is, we got accepted by TrueMed, so that people are going to be able to use their HSA and FSA with the app. Not this week, but in the next couple of weeks, it'll be all up on our website when it happens. But that's really cool too, because this is like you get to spend healthcare money on preventative care in a way that supports your running habit.
For my non-American listeners, this is just one of the quirks of the American healthcare system.
That's right.
Yeah. So if you're non-American, you can still get the app. You just don't have to pay for it with pre-tax health dollars.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. What a mess. So one last question I have as we are wrapping up here, because when I first learned about this app and what you're doing with it, I thought I was so struck by what you said, working with an elite team, right? That so many elite runners don't have access to these types of resources. But I think that's something that is not understood, in that when we think of professional athletes, we think of NFL, NBA, like these teams with huge resources who have registered dietitians, multiples, sports psychologists, also trainers and PTs and like all the professionals, but that running does not have that budget. A lot of professional runners are getting paid, but it sounds like they're kind of on their own.
Yeah, a lot of professional runners are on their own. So I actually have my team of professional runners uses this app, and then I know other professional runners around the country that are using the app. So it's actually really cool. One of them reached out to me recently. She hurt her Achilles. She didn't know what to do. She lives, her coach is in one place and she lives in another city. And she didn't know anybody. She's like, I trust you because I know you, but I don't know anybody else that understands running like you do. And I said, well, if you have an Achilles issue, I built this program out because of this. And she's been using it and now she's back to running. And that's really cool. And so like these elite athletes, I think we do have this perception that they make all this money, they have all these resources. At the Atlanta Track Club, we've done a really good job of giving resources to our athletes, but that is not the norm. Most athletes, professional athletes, some of them are making really good money. Some of them are making $10,000 a year and not able to go see a massage therapist or a PT or a dietitian or sports psychologist. And when you are training at such a high level, you need that sport or that support because the way that you're using your body. Everybody needs to know this information. I mean, you could use this if you run 2 miles a week like I do and use some of the, yoga classes or the meditations, the recipes or whatever. But yeah, elite athletes, it's shocking. I was shocked when I started working with them to realize how much they didn't get. And I was so surprised.
And then you did something about it.
Yeah. I keep, there's a joke at my office, like, please don't come up with another idea, Kate. What is, they're like, is this project over yet? Or like, I'll be like, guys, I have this great idea. They're like, no.
Stop innovating.
Yeah.
Oh, so cool. Well, I am very excited about it. I'm excited that you're excited about it. And I want to thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story. Like I said, what a journey. And I really appreciate your being open about it. I know that it's hard sometimes to talk about those things, but I also know that it can be very cathartic. And also, if we can help just one person, it's worth it.
It is worth it. Thank you for having me. This has been really fun. Thanks.